Some minds carry more power than their outer lives reveal. From the outside, they may seem calm, peaceful, even unthreatening. But when someone wounds them, they can sometimes see, within a single cold second, exactly how they could destroy that person. And then they choose not to. And that is why their regret can be so unusual. Most people regret the things they were too weak to do. But these minds often regret the things they were fully capable of doing and quietly chose not to. They knew the relationship had changed months before it ended. They saw the flaw in the plan, while everyone else was still praising it. They had the sentence, the idea, the boundary, the decision, and then they watched themselves do nothing. Not because they were confused, because some part of them was still hoping reality would spare them from having to act on what they already knew. That is a very specific kind of suffering. They are not powerless. They are living beside their power, close enough to feel it, close enough to imagine the life it could create, but not close enough to use it without frightening themselves. And perhaps by now, you recognize this mind as your own. It is almost as if your life has begun to orbit one sentence. You could, but you don't. And the strangest part is that the sentence does not come from the outside. It rises from within you, returning whenever the life you are living falls short of the power you can already sense. But this is not merely a sentence of regret. It carries another meaning, one we will return to later. This pattern is especially common among deep intuitive personality types, such as the INFJ, INTJ, INFP, and INTP. Each of these types can spend years developing an extraordinary inner life, while remaining strangely absent from their own outer life. They understand, they observe, they predict, they refine. But when the moment comes to speak, leave, publish, confront, choose, or begin, something inside them steps backward. And later, the mind creates a respectable explanation. I needed more information. It was not the right time. I did not want to hurt anyone. I was still working on it. Sometimes those explanations are true, but sometimes they are disguises, because the deeper fear is not always that you will fail. Sometimes the deeper fear is that you will act and discover that you were never as helpless as you believed. That discovery changes your identity. It removes the comfort of saying, I couldn't. It leaves you with the more difficult truth. You could, but you didn't. This is what we can call the shadow of karma. Not cosmic punishment, not some mystical scorekeeper deciding what you deserve. Karma, in this sense, is repetition, a lesson returning through different people, different opportunities, and different losses, because your response has not changed. The same kind of relationship appears again. The same self-doubt enters a new project. The same hesitation wears a more intelligent disguise. Life keeps asking the same question until your answer becomes different. For deep intuitives, that question is often this: will you continue to admire your power in private, or will you finally accept the consequences of using it? There are three powers that deep intuitives often fear in themselves, not because these powers are dark, because they are disruptive. They disturb relationships built on your silence. They disturb identities built on your hesitation. And they disturb the version of your life that only survives because you keep pretending not to know what you know. The first power can feel unsettling because it often arrives before proof. But that does not make it imaginary. It is the ability to see the pattern before it becomes obvious. You may have spent much of your life wishing you could switch this off. The constant noticing, the way one strange sentence changes your entire impression of a person, the way you feel the atmosphere shift before anyone admits there is a problem, the way you can watch two events that seem unrelated and immediately sense the structure connecting them. Deep intuitives do not simply absorb information. They organize it beneath the level of conscious effort. An INFJ may notice that someone's warmth disappears whenever control is threatened. An INTJ may see that a project will fail because the incentives are wrong, even though the current results look impressive. An INFP may hear someone describe success and quietly recognize that the person is living against their own values. An INTP may notice that an entire argument depends on one assumption nobody has examined. From the outside, this can look like suspicion, overthinking, or detachment, but often it is pattern recognition. The difficulty is that patterns usually become visible to you before they become provable to everyone else. That creates an uncomfortable gap. You sense something, but you cannot yet defend it. And if you have been mocked, dismissed, or punished for your perceptions in the past, you may begin to treat your own intuition like an unreliable witness. You wait, you observe, you collect more evidence, you give people another chance, then another, and eventually, the thing you sensed becomes obvious. The betrayal happens, the plan collapses, the inconsistency becomes undeniable, and you are left with a painful thought. I knew. That thought is not pride. Often, it is grief, because knowing did not protect you. Its purpose was never merely to warn you, it was preparing you to become someone who could finally act on what they saw. This is the first hidden power of deep intuitives, not merely noticing what others miss, but allowing what you notice to influence your choices. That distinction matters. Many intuitive people are highly perceptive, but remain easy to manipulate because they continually override their perception. They see the red flag, then explain it away. They sense the resentment, then become more accommodating. They notice the contradiction, then assume they are being unfair. The problem is not that your intuition is always right. It is not. No human perception is flawless. The point is not to obey every feeling as though it were prophecy. The point is to stop treating your inner signals as meaningless simply because they are not yet convenient. Mature intuition does not say, "I know everything." It says, "Something is here. I need to pay attention." That may lead you to ask a better question. Set a temporary boundary. Slow down, investigate, or refuse to commit before the picture becomes clearer. The power is not certainty. The power is self-trust. And self-trust is frightening because it changes who has authority over your life. Once you begin taking your own perceptions seriously, other people can no longer define reality for you so easily. A charming person cannot erase the pattern you have noticed. A confident voice cannot automatically overrule your judgment. A group's enthusiasm cannot force you to ignore a structural flaw. You become harder to rush, harder to guilt, harder to confuse. That is why this power may have frightened you. It changes your relationships. People who loved your insight when it benefited them may not love it when it protects you. The second power can feel like cruelty to a deep intuitive, but often it is simply self-respect. It is the ability to remove your energy without explaining yourself forever. Deep intuitives are often very good at understanding why people behave badly. This sounds like a strength, and it is, until understanding becomes the reason you remain in situations that are destroying you. You see the childhood wound behind the anger, the insecurity behind the arrogance, the fear behind the distance, the shame behind the dishonesty. And because you can understand the pain beneath the behavior, you may keep offering compassion long after compassion has become self-abandonment. This happens differently for each type. The INFJ may believe that one more honest conversation will finally create mutual understanding. The INTJ may keep trying to repair a relationship because leaving before every solution has been tested feels irrational. The INFP may stay loyal to the person someone could become rather than the person they repeatedly choose to be. The INTP may continue analyzing the situation because reaching a final emotional conclusion feels less comfortable than keeping the question open. But there comes a point where further understanding changes nothing. You already understand. You understand their fear. You understand the pattern. You understand the history. You may even understand why they cannot give you what you need. And still, the relationship remains harmful. This is where the second power appears, the ability to withdraw your energy without receiving permission, agreement, or complete understanding from the other person. Many deep intuitives fear this power because it feels cruel. You do not want to become cold. You do not want to punish anyone. You do not want to resemble the people who abandoned or misunderstood you. So you explain. Then explain your explanation. Then soften the boundary so the other person does not feel rejected. Then remain available to discuss whether your boundary is fair. At some point, the boundary disappears under the weight of the explanation. You are still there, still translating, still trying to produce the perfect combination of words that will make someone respect a reality they have already chosen not to respect. But some people do understand your boundary. They simply do not benefit from accepting it. That is a difficult truth for empathetic people. Misunderstanding is not always the problem. Sometimes the problem is access. They are not confused about what hurts you. They are hoping you will continue tolerating it. Walking away is not always an act of anger. Sometimes it is the most accurate conclusion available. Not revenge, not drama. A conclusion. The relationship has shown you what it is. The pattern has repeated enough times. The future being promised has no evidence behind it. And now your task is not to explain more beautifully. It is to respond honestly. This is where the shadow of karma becomes visible. The lesson repeats whenever you choose someone's potential over your own reality. You meet the same emotional pattern in a different body. The same dynamic appears with a new vocabulary. You think, this time is different. And for a while, it is. But the central question returns. Will you abandon yourself to preserve the connection? The rare power is not cutting people off impulsively. It is not becoming detached, superior, or unreachable. The power is knowing when continued access requires too much self-betrayal. It is being able to say, I understand you. I may even care about you, and I am still leaving. That sentence can feel almost unbearable to a deep intuitive, because it does not offer the fantasy that complete understanding will repair everything. It accepts that compassion and distance can exist together. You can forgive someone and still remove access. You can love someone and stop participating in the pattern. You can wish them healing without volunteering to become the place where their unhealed parts continue to land. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect without hatred. The third power is the one that quietly shapes entire lives. It is the power to make something real before anyone confirms that it matters, to create from an inner vision before the outside world validates it. Deep intuitives often live with ideas that feel unusually complete on the inside. A book, a channel, a philosophy, a body of work, a business, a new identity, a different way of living. You do not merely think about it, you can almost inhabit it. You can feel the tone of it, the structure, the meaning, the person you would become if you gave it form. But the outside world may offer very little confirmation. Nobody is waiting. Nobody has guaranteed that it will work. The first version may be awkward. The response may be small. And the gap between the clarity of the inner vision and the imperfection of the first real attempt can feel humiliating. So the vision remains internal. You research, outline, rework, prepare, rename, reconsider. You tell yourself you are improving the idea. Sometimes you are, but sometimes you are protecting the fantasy from contact with reality. An uncreated idea can remain perfect forever. A created one must become specific. It must have a title, a shape, a beginning. It must risk being ordinary before it becomes exceptional. That is often what the deep intuitives struggle to tolerate. Not effort, exposure. The INFJ may fear that the work will be misunderstood or reduced to something shallower than intended. The INTJ may fear building the wrong version and wasting time on an inefficient path. The INFP may fear that public response will contaminate something deeply personal. The INTP may fear acting while important questions remain unresolved. All four may continue thinking, because thought preserves possibility. Action eliminates alternatives. The moment you choose one direction, you lose the imagined perfection of every other direction. That can feel like a kind of death. But creation has always required this sacrifice. You must give up the flawless thing in your head to make the imperfect thing that can exist. And this is where many deep intuitives begin resenting people who appear less thoughtful but more successful. You see someone with less nuance publish consistently. Someone with a simpler idea build an audience. Someone with less technical understanding begin the project you have been planning for years. You may tell yourself that their work is shallow. Sometimes it is, but beneath that criticism, there may be another feeling: envy. Not because they possess something you lack, because they are using something you also possess. Permission. They gave themselves permission to begin badly, to be seen learning, to discover the work by doing the work. Meanwhile, you may be waiting to become the person who feels ready, but readiness is often produced by action, not before it. You do not think your way into creative courage. You build evidence. You publish and survive. You speak and survive. You make a mistake and survive. You receive indifference and continue. You receive criticism and refine. You discover that the feared consequence is painful perhaps, but not fatal. That is how the nervous system learns. The third power is not imagination. Deep intuitives usually have plenty of imagination. The power is embodiment, turning a private identity into public behavior, letting the world meet an unfinished version of your gift, accepting that your first visible attempt may not represent the full depth of what you are capable of. This is how your potential stops haunting you. It becomes practice, then skill, then work, then a life. There is a reason deep intuitives often hide these powers. What gets exiled into the shadow is not always something shameful. Sometimes it is something powerful that once felt unsafe to reveal. Your perception may have unsettled adults who wanted obedience. Your independence may have threatened people who expected access. Your imagination may have been treated as impractical. Your questions may have irritated people who preferred certainty. Your emotional depth may have been called oversensitivity. Your need for solitude may have been interpreted as rejection. So, you adapted. You became useful in ways that felt safe. The quiet helper, the reliable problem solver, the private artist, the person who understood everyone, the person who needed very little, the person with enormous potential who was always still figuring things out. These identities may have protected you. They gave you belonging. They reduced conflict. They allowed you to hide strength inside helpfulness, intelligence, sensitivity, or humility. But a protective identity can become a prison long after the danger has passed. You may no longer be surrounded by the people who taught you to disappear, yet their expectations still live inside you. You still hear the warning: do not be too certain. Do not be too visible. Do not ask for too much. Do not leave without making everyone comfortable. Do not create until you can guarantee that it will be exceptional. And because the warning now sounds like your own voice, you mistake conditioning for personality. You say, "That is just how I am." But perhaps it is not who you are. Perhaps it is how you learned to remain safe. There is a difference. Your personality may explain your natural preferences. It does not have to become a life sentence. Being an INFJ does not mean endlessly absorbing other people's emotions. Being an INTJ does not mean delaying action until uncertainty disappears. Being an INFP does not mean hiding your work to preserve its purity. Being an INTP does not mean remaining detached from every decision until the perfect model appears. A personality type can help you understand your patterns. It should not become a poetic excuse for repeating them. And this is why the sentence, "you could, but you don't," is not an insult. There is a harsh way to hear it. It can sound like blame, like wasted potential, like another demand to become more productive, confident, or successful. But there is another way to hear it, a more compassionate way. You could, but you don't. Yet, the ability is still there. Your silence does not prove that you have no voice. Your hesitation does not prove that you are incapable of courage. Your unfinished work does not prove that you have nothing to offer. Your tolerance of the wrong relationship does not mean you are weak. It may mean that your survival strategies are still stronger than your self-trust. That can change, not through self-hatred, not by turning your past into evidence against you. You do not heal by humiliating the version of you who hid. That person was trying to protect something. Connection, safety, dignity, hope. They used the methods available to them. Perhaps they over-explained because being misunderstood once felt dangerous. Perhaps they stayed quiet because speaking once made everything worse. Perhaps they perfected things in private because public failure once felt unbearable. Perhaps they kept understanding others because understanding was the only power they believed they were allowed to have. You do not need to destroy that part of yourself. You need to update it, to show it that the present is not the past, that a boundary can cause conflict without causing catastrophe, that visibility can bring criticism without destroying your identity, that being wrong does not make your intuition worthless, that leaving does not make you heartless, that beginning imperfectly does not expose you as a fraud. Self-acceptance is not looking at every pattern and saying, "This is simply who I am." Sometimes self-acceptance means saying, "This pattern makes sense, and I no longer need it." Each intuitive type carries this struggle differently. So before we go deeper, it is worth looking at how this hidden power appears in the INFJ, the INTJ, the INFP, and the INTP. If you are an INFJ, your hidden power is not only your ability to understand people, it is your ability to stop understanding them at your own expense. You may be used to seeing the emotional reason beneath every action, but explanation does not cancel impact. You are allowed to believe what repeated behavior is showing you. You are allowed to become less available. You are allowed to speak before your words are perfectly gentle. Your role is not to maintain emotional harmony at the cost of internal truth. The people who genuinely love you do not need you to disappear in order to feel safe. If you are an INTJ, your hidden power is not only your ability to construct the ideal strategy, it is your ability to move while the strategy is still incomplete. You may believe action should follow certainty, but in many parts of life, certainty follows action. You gather information by entering the environment. You improve the system by watching where it fails. You discover the correct path by eliminating the wrong ones. An imperfect decision can teach you more than another month of theoretical control. Your intelligence is not compromised by experimentation. It becomes useful through it. If you are an INFP, your hidden power is not only preserving what feels sacred, it is allowing the sacred thing to become visible. You may fear that attention will distort your work, that judgment will make you question something you once loved, that turning creativity into something public will cheapen it. But hiding your gift does not protect it forever. Eventually, protection becomes deprivation. Your work cannot reach the people who need it while it exists only inside you. You do not need to become louder than you are. You need to become present. If you are an INTP, your hidden power is not only asking the question nobody else considered, It is accepting that some questions can only be answered through participation. You may keep refining the model because reality is messy. Reality introduces emotion, timing, error, and unpredictability. But a theory that never encounters the world cannot mature. You do not need complete intellectual closure before making a meaningful decision. Some clarity only appears after commitment. Thinking is one form of intelligence. Testing is another. But insight alone is not integration. You can understand every pattern and still remain loyal to it. The shadow begins to change only when what you know becomes a boundary, a decision, or an act of creation. And this brings us back to the shadow of karma. Perhaps karma is not life punishing you. Perhaps it is the part of you that refuses to disappear permanently. It returns as discomfort, restlessness, envy, resentment, a repeated relationship, a persistent idea, a feeling that your life is somehow close to beginning even though years have passed. These feelings are not always proof that something is wrong with you. Sometimes they are proof that something in you remains unlived. The pattern repeats because your deeper self keeps asking for a response. Not a theory, not another promise, a response. Will you trust what you see? Will you remove your energy from what repeatedly harms you? Will you make the inner vision real before anyone guarantees that it matters? Those are the three powers: to see what others miss, to leave what no longer deserves your energy, and to build what does not yet exist. And perhaps the reason you fear them is not that they will turn you into someone dangerous. Perhaps you know they will turn you into someone responsible for their own life. Someone who can no longer say they had no choice. Someone who can no longer hide completely inside potential. Someone whose outer world begins to reveal what has been living inside them all along. You could. And that sentence is not a condemnation. It is evidence. The door was never imaginary. Your hand has simply been resting on the handle. So the final question is not whether you possess these powers. The real question is which one you are ready to stop withholding. Is it the power to see the pattern, the power to remove your energy, or the power to make your inner vision real? Leave your answer in the comments. You do not need to explain your entire story. Just name the power. Sometimes naming what you have been withholding is the first moment you stop pretending it is not there. And if you are a deep intuitive, or simply someone who has spent years living more deeply inside than outside, subscribe. This channel is for the parts of you that were never weak, only hidden.